Catch-23. The first thing Mateo Orlov Mendoza lost was the right to enter a building in which he had never worked. This would later become important. At the time, it seemed merely absurd. The building stood on a low green hill above Puerto Esperanza, where the sea was almost offensively blue, and the jacarandas had begun dropping purple flowers onto the bonnets of diplomatic cars. It belonged to PANCOM, the Pan-Continental Allied Command, although ownership in Nueva Esperanza was one of those concepts which became less precise the closer one came to military property. The land belonged to the Republic. The buildings had been paid for by 6 governments. The roads were maintained by the municipality. The perimeter was guarded by Nueva Esperanzan soldiers wearing PANCOM insignia, and the authority to decide who might cross it appeared to belong to everyone in general and nobody in particular. Mateo had entered the compound 47 times. On the 48th, a young corporal looked at the screen, looked at Mateo, and then looked at the screen again. "Señor Mendoza?" "Yes." "Please wait." Mateo waited. The morning was already hot. A small lizard lay motionless on the concrete wall beside the gate, practicing the ancient military discipline of appearing to be somewhere while doing nothing. Beyond the barrier, officers from 7 countries were arriving for work beneath a row of flags which, in the absence of wind, hung with the exhausted intimacy of laundry. The corporal made a telephone call. Another soldier arrived. Then a captain. The captain was polite. This worried Mateo. People in Nueva Esperanza were rude when nothing was wrong. "Señor Mendoza," the captain said, "there appears to be an issue with your access." "What issue? I don't have that information." "Who does?" "I cannot say." "Because you don't know." The captain considered this. "Because I cannot say." Mateo looked at the barrier. Behind it, Major General Evelyn Brooks was walking towards him. She had been in a meeting when his message arrived. She had left the meeting without explanation, which for an American 2-star general was itself a form of explanation. "What's happening?" she asked. The captain saluted. "Ma'am." "What's happening?" "There is an access restriction." "On whose authority?" "I'm not able to discuss the system." "I didn't ask you to discuss the system. I asked whose authority." The captain looked briefly grateful, as though the distinction might save him. Then the gratitude disappeared. "I don't have visibility of that, ma'am." Evelyn turned to Mateo. He smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile he used when reality had become so badly constructed that criticism seemed ungenerous. "I have become invisible," he said. "No," Evelyn replied. "Apparently you've become visible in a very specific way." That was the beginning. Or, more accurately, that was the first moment at which the beginning became visible. Admiral Sebastián de la Cruz had loved Evelyn Brooks for 3 years without committing the administrative error of telling her. He had commanded fleets, negotiated basing agreements, survived 2 defence ministers, 1 parliamentary inquiry, and a helicopter landing, which had subsequently been described as controlled because everyone had survived. He understood that some things became weaker when spoken aloud. His feelings for Evelyn belonged, in his own mind, to the category of strategic patience. He had first noticed her at a reception in Madrid when she had contradicted a deputy minister about maritime logistics, and then, after proving herself correct, quietly moved the conversation elsewhere so that the man would not be publicly humiliated. De la Cruz had been struck not by the victory, but by the restraint. Power, in his experience, usually announced itself. Evelyn's did not need to. For 2 years they worked together. He sent her books. She sent him corrected operational assumptions. He invited her to dinner. She brought 3 staff officers. He arranged a private tour of a 17th century naval archive. She spent 4 hours discussing insurance records with the archivist. Then Mateo appeared. He appeared, as serious disasters often do, without looking like one. There was no seduction de la Cruz could identify, no dramatic breach of professional boundaries, no scene from which a reasonable man might have retreated with dignity. Mateo was simply there one evening at a small restaurant near the Old Port, leaning across a table while Evelyn laughed in a way de la Cruz had never heard her laugh at PANCOM. Mateo was not even, de la Cruz thought bitterly, impressive in the correct dimensions. He was not a diplomat, not an officer, not a minister, not an oligarch. He restored old buildings and advised the municipality on urban heritage. He wore linen shirts that were never properly ironed. He had an inconvenient face. Handsome, not because its features were perfect, but because amusement seemed always to be waiting behind them. And he had been born in the Northern Volga Republic. That fact existed in a database. At first, it was merely a fact. Then, someone attached a question to it. Years later, no one could establish who had attached the first question. De la Cruz himself would remember a conversation with a security advisor in which he had said only that given Major General Brooks' position, the relationship should be understood properly. The security advisor would remember being asked whether all relevant background factors had been considered. A liaison officer would record that the Admiral had expressed concern regarding potential foreign nexus. An analyst would receive a tasking note containing the words NVR Berth Senior off-officer relationship. The analyst would not know Matteo. He would know the Northern Volga Republic. The Republic had inherited 3 missile factories, a declining population, a sophisticated intelligence service, and a national mythology based, largely on having been betrayed by everyone at different times. Its government denied interfering in foreign elections, financing extremist parties, poisoning defectors and stealing industrial secrets, sometimes with greater credibility than others. Matteo had left when he was 4. His father had been an Argentine engineer building hydroelectric turbines. His mother, Elena Mendoza, had taught Spanish at the Technical University in Novorad. They had stayed 6 years, long enough for Matteo to be born in a concrete maternity hospital beside a frozen river and acquire, by the irreversible magic of a line on a form, a geopolitical biography. He remembered snow. He remembered a red wooden horse. He remembered his mother crying at an airport. He did not remember the state. The state remembered him. The first question Evelyn received was not about Matteo. It was about judgment. A colonel from the Personnel Security Office sat opposite her in a room with no windows and asked whether she had any personal relationships which might create vulnerabilities. Everyone has personal relationships which might create vulnerabilities, Evelyn said. The colonel did not smile. I mean, foreign relationships. Most people are foreign to most other people. General. Colonel. He looked down at the form. Are you in a close personal relationship with Mr. Matteo Orloff Mendoza? Yes. Were you aware that Mr. Mendoza was born in the Northern Volga Republic? I was present when he showed me his passport. That isn't what I asked. No, I was not aware before he told me. When did he tell you? On our second date. Why? I asked him where Orloff came from. And what did he say? He said his parents had a sense of humour. The colonel wrote something. What did you write? I'm making notes. Of what? The interview. I can see that. What did you write? I'm not required to disclose my notes. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. The colonel shifted in his chair. What is the allegation? She asked. There is no allegation. Then why am I here? This is an administrative process. Concerning what? I'm not able to discuss sources or methods. I didn't ask for sources or methods. The colonel's face changed almost imperceptibly. Years later, Evelyn would remember that moment. It was the first time she understood that the conversation was not failing because the man opposite her lacked answers. It was failing because the structure of the process allowed him to answer a different question from the one she had asked. She left with a 6-page notice explaining her duties of candour. The notice did not explain the concern. 3 weeks later, Matteo was denied access to Pancom. For the first 6 months, they behaved like reasonable people. This was their first mistake. Evelyn wrote through her chain of command. Matteo wrote to Pancom Security. Pancom Security replied that it could not comment on matters relating to the personnel security processes of participating nations. Evelyn asked her National Security Office whether Matteo was under investigation. She was told that information concerning a foreign civilian could not be disclosed to her. Matteo asked the Nueva Esperanza Ministry of Interior whether he was under investigation. The ministry replied that it held no record of any criminal or national security investigation concerning him. He sent this to Pancom. Pancom replied that the absence of a host nation investigation did not determine eligibility for access to a multinational military installation. He asked what did. Pancom replied that access was a privilege, not a right. He asked who had decided that he should not have the privilege. Pancom replied that operational security arrangements were not subject to individual negotiation. Evelyn asked what concern she was expected to answer. She was told that the review remained ongoing. She asked what information she could provide. She was told that she had a continuing duty to provide all relevant information. Relevant to what? She asked. The answer was classified. At home, they began keeping a folder, then 2 folders, then a filing cabinet. Matteo labelled the first drawer things that do not exist. The second was things that exist but cannot be discussed. The third was things that cannot be discussed because they do exist. Evelyn objected that this was not a proper records management system. Matteo said it was the most accurate one they had encountered. For a while, the joke helped. Then Evelyn was removed from an operational planning group. No reason was given. What? No adverse finding had been made. Her security clearance remained formally active. Certain compartments were nevertheless temporarily unavailable. The temporary arrangement lasted 11 months. Matteo's access restriction also remained temporary. No review date was identified. One evening, Evelyn came home carrying a cardboard box. Matteo was making arroz con pollo. The kitchen smelled of saffron, onions, and the rain that had begun striking the balcony doors. He looked at the box. "What's that?" "My office. All of it. The part I'm permitted to take home." She put the box on the table. Matteo turned off the stove. "What happened?" "They're assigning me to Strategic Heritage Liaison." He waited. "That sounds prestigious." "It has 3 employees. Perhaps they are extremely strategic. One of them is a historian." "That sounds useful." The other 2 organize commemorative events. Matteo looked at her. She sat down. For the first time since the gate, he saw fear. Not fear of losing rank. Not even fear of losing her career. Fear of being rewritten. "They're making me decorative," she said. He took her hand. Neither of them mentioned Dela Cruz. By then, they did not need to. They met Laura Vale because a judge in London had once described her submissions as unnecessarily architectural. She had kept the transcript. Laura was a lawyer by qualification, a systems architect by temperament, and a nuisance by professional evolution. She had spent 20 years discovering that many legal problems were not, in fact, legal problems until someone forced them into legal form, and that the forcing itself often destroyed the thing one needed to understand. Her office occupied the upper floor of an old customs house overlooking the Thames. The building had been converted badly enough to preserve its character. Pipes ran visibly along brick walls. Books competed with servers. A 19th century map of shipping routes hung beside a screen displaying something that looked like a nervous system designed by accountants. Evelyn and Matteo arrived with 11 boxes. Laura looked at them. "Is that everything?" Matteo said. "No." Laura smiled. "Good." For 3 weeks, she did not give legal advice. This disturbed Evelyn. "What are we doing?" she asked. "Finding out what happened. We know what happened. No, you know what you experienced. That is what happened." "It is one ontology of what happened." Matteo looked at Evelyn. "She talks like this all the time." "I hope not." Laura ignored them. She fed documents into Ariadne 9. The system had not been built to predict judgments or draft pleadings. Laura distrusted machines that were asked to imitate conclusions before anyone had mapped the problem. Ariadne had been designed for something less glamorous and, in Laura's view, more useful, remembering relationships humans forgot. It read correspondence, metadata, dates, institutional structures, policy documents, refusals, internal references, disclosure schedules, complaints, decisions, review letters, and the subtle migrations of nouns. On the first day, it produced a chronology. On the second, a contradiction table. On the fifth, it identified 14 different descriptions of Matteo's status. Visitor foreign national, local civilian associated person relationship nexus, non-PANCOM, individual external security factor, third-party concerned person with outstanding individual subject to local access controls, non-investigated person, foreign-born national civilian dependency. Mr. Mendoza Matteo stared at the screen. "I like the last one. It appears only twice," Ariadne said. Its voice was neutral, which made its occasional observations more unsettling. Laura asked, "What is the legal status of the restriction?" Unresolved introvation. "Ownership is distributed across incompatible attributions." Translate. Every identified institution then is sole ownership. Collectively, the institutions maintain the consequence. Evelyn leaned forward. "Who owns the allegation?" Ariadne was silent for 11 seconds. Then, "No allegation has been identified." Matteo laughed. Laura did not. "Who owns the concern?" Another pause. "Question requires definition of concern. Use institutional language." The screen changed. Documents appeared as nodes, lines spread between them: personnel security, PANCOM command, host nation police, US Security Directorate, Nueva Esperanza and Interior Ministry, multinational counterintelligence cell, data protection office, Inspector General. Admiral's office, access control, legal directorate. A red line ran from a personnel interview concerning Evelyn to a security note concerning Matteo. Another line ran from Matteo's birthplace to an analytical reference. A third returned from the access restriction to the ongoing personnel review. Ariadne said, "The concern appears to be self-supporting." Nobody spoke, was. "Explain. Major General Brooks's Parks is zog to continuing Vraxef, partly because of a Shushan toward external relationship factor." Mr. Mendoza is subject to continuing consequences, partly because of a security contact associated with Major Wide General Brooks. Evelyn stood up. That's circular. Yes. Then resolve the external factor. Mr. Mendoza has no recognized status,